By the closing stages of the war, the SAS had expanded significantly, becoming a brigade under Brigadier Mad Mike Calvert, a former Chindit with extensive experience in Burma and Southeast Asia. On April 9, B and C Squadrons of 1st SAS Regiment arrived in Meppen, a town in northwestern Germany near the Dutch border, through which the River Ems flowed northward. The squadrons had been attached to the Canadian 2nd Army to lead the way for Major General Chris Vokes' 4th Armoured Division in its advance towards Oldenburg. From there they were to continue their push toward Wilhelmshaven on the North Sea. They would be facing elements of the 7th Fallschirmjäger Division, commanded by General Wolfgang Erdmann. Their mission, codenamed Operation Howard, was conducted under the leadership of 1st SAS's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Blair, Paddy Mayne. Dicey transport. The SAS were travelling in their specially modified jeeps. These fast and highly manoeuvrable vehicles have been their preferred mode of transport since their North African desert operations, and were armed with twin Vickers K and Browning machine guns. Many had been recently fitted with a little armour in the form of small screens and a plate behind the radiator grille, though this was often removed in the field for the sake of mobility, leaving their occupants even more exposed than usual. This was particularly dangerous when leading an advance into enemy territory with little intelligence on potential resistance. Ambush. On April 10, B Squadron took the lead under the command of Major Dick Bond, a former member of the highly secret auxiliary units which had been trained to form a resistance force in case of a German invasion of Britain in 1940. Bond and his men were advancing from the south toward the village of Borga, about 35 miles southwest of Oldenburg. As they passed a cluster of farm buildings arranged in an L shape, they were suddenly ambushed by Panzerfausts and small arms fire, coming from both the buildings and nearby woodland along the road. Bond and the 3 others in his jeep veered off the road, leaped out and took cover in a drainage ditch, followed closely by the men in the jeep behind them. Moments later, as Bond raised his head, he was struck by a sniper's bullet and killed instantly. His driver suffered the same fate shortly after, as he also tried to look out of the ditch. A furious Paddy Mayne. Mayne received news of the ambush via radio and within 10 minutes of the attack arrived at the halted jeeps positioned safely to the south. Visibly shaken by the deaths and seething in silent rage, he listened to the account of what had happened. After confirming that no enemy fire had come from the first farm building, he grabbed a Bren gun, extra magazines, and set off toward the structures. Across the road, pinned down in a ditch near the abandoned jeep, 6 men were trapped, 2 of them badly wounded. Clearing the farm buildings. His driver, fellow Ulsterman Billy Hull, followed him. Mayne led the way into the first farmhouse, then instructed Hull to head upstairs and fire a burst from his Thompson submachine gun through one of the windows. As Hull let off a volley of bullets, the enemy in the adjacent farm building responded with a furious barrage, revealing their position. With their location confirmed, Hull rushed back downstairs while Mayne unleashed a stream of fire from his Bren gun, sweeping the enemy-occupied house before storming in alone and eliminating any remaining resistance. Whatever the outcome, the threat from the farm buildings was neutralized. A volunteer. With the first phase of his rescue mission complete, Paddy returned to the rest of the squadron. Though the farmhouses were now secured, enemy fire continued from the nearby woodland. He called for a volunteer to man the Vickers K machine guns on his jeep, and Lieutenant John Scott, formerly of the SBS, immediately stepped forward. A mad dash. Mayne's approach remained true to the SAS's daring desert tactics, storming fast, guns blazing. With Mayne at the wheel and Scott manning the twin Vickers, they drove straight at the enemy, firing relentlessly. As Scott rained bullets on the German troops, return fire was scattered and inaccurate, gradually weakening until it ceased altogether. The Fallschirmjäger in the woodland had either been killed or had fled. Once again, Mayne's audacious tactics had proven devastatingly effective. And back again. Paddy Mayne then turned the jeep around, drove back under covering fire from Scott, and swiftly lifted the 2 wounded men into the vehicle before returning to the main group. Reflecting on the event later, Lieutenant Scott, who would receive a mention in dispatches for his part in the fight, remarked, "Throughout the entire action, Colonel Mayne showed a personal courage that it has never before been my privilege to witness." Almost the entire SAS squadron had witnessed Mayne's heroics, an important factor for any gallantry award. Brigadier Mike Calvert had no hesitation in recommending him for the highest honour, a decision that was quickly approved by General Vokes, General Simmons, the Canadian 2nd Army commander, and even Field Marshal Montgomery himself. By all traditional criteria, his actions met the standards for a Victoria Cross. Paddy Mayne's legacy. Mayne was an extraordinary warrior, an inspiring leader, and a man of immense courage. He remains one of the most revered figures of the Second World War, celebrated through statues, books, and now BBC television serializations. He was awarded 4 DSOs, an honour incredibly difficult to achieve even once. His actions near Oldenburg in April 1945 merited a Victoria Cross. Surely, it's time he finally receives it. If you enjoyed watching this video about the exploits of the legendary Paddy Mayne, then please consider liking and subscribing. See you next time.